Hi everyone, I'm just going to share my screen. So, can I get a sense of whether you can see my slide there? My opening slide with my name? If someone doesn't mind just confirming. I can't hear or see you, sorry. So I think I need to hear confirmation.
Yeah, we can see it. We can see it. Yeah, and people are saying so in the chat too.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country that I'm joining you all from today in my mother tongue of Bahasa Indonesia. So pertama-tama saya ingin mengutarakan rasa hormat saya kepada tuan tanah tradisional tanah di mana saya berada, terutama kepada kebangsaan Kulin. So firstly, I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you from, especially to the people of the Kulin Nation. My name is Rani Pramesti, and I'm the Strategic Advisor to Creatives of Color. I'm just going to quickly audio describe myself as well as the slide. So I'm a Chinese-Indonesian person in my early 30s. I have black hair. I'm wearing black rimmed glasses and a blue bandana and a maroon woven scarf, as well as a bright yellow top. And on the slide, on the right-hand side, there is a circle painted in gradients of blue and gray. And in the middle of the circle, there are three people engaged in three creative activities. So one person is taking a photograph, another person is dancing, and another person is holding a book. So a bit about Creatives of Color. Creatives of Color is a shared space and online platform for creative people of color by creative people of color based on Kulin country in so-called Melbourne in Australia. Our vision is for supportive, well-resourced, joyous, and thriving creative communities of color. And our values include accessibility, community, compassion, decolonization, experimentation, and transparency. And we are open to our vision, mission, and value statement evolving as we evolve. So I wanted to share a little bit about how we came to be. And on this slide, there's a close-up of the previous image in the circle, and also includes an additional figure who is holding a paintbrush and wearing an orange hat. So how Creatives of Color came to be was actually following a series of traumatic experiences navigating the predominantly white so-called Australian creative sectors. In 2019, I was part of a startup accelerator program that was designed to introduce creatives to the lean startup methodology. Unfortunately, though, this predominantly white environment became quite unsafe, which led me to drop out. What followed after was that we ended up applying the customer validation interview process to the experiences of creatives of color. So if you'd like to find our full research findings, including the top 12 problems that we identified, you can please go ahead to our website, creativesofcolor.com. On this slide, there is an image in the middle of the circle of a group of people of color of various dark brown, light brown, and tan skin, and multicolored hairdresses and very bright red hair looking towards the left. Whoever is sharing the platform with me, I can hear you. I'm not sure if maybe you might need to mute yourself. Thank you. So what I want to do today with all of you, though, is to practice our value of transparency. And at Creatives of Color, how we define that is we make time to share our processes with the communities that we work with. So actually what I'd like to share with you today is some top of mind questions that we've been grappling with through and at Creatives of Color. So firstly, what is our responsibility as settlers on colonized country? On this slide, at the center of the circle, there is a question mark, which is populated by illustrated heads, again in dark brown, light brown, and tan skin color, and the heads are moving from left to right. So what is our responsibility as settlers on colonized country? If you think that this question might not apply to you in America, because maybe you think that colonization was so long ago, I invite you to be curious about that. And I would like to try to answer this question by stating my positionality and what I carry in my body as a Chinese Indonesian person. So I was born and raised in Indonesia, a country that was under 3.5 centuries of Dutch colonial control. And during the colonial times, segregation was very strictly applied, whereby European or the so-called Europeans were placed at the very top. And then Vreemde Oosterlingen, or anyone that was from the so-called Far East, was in the middle. So that included people from my family who are Chinese descent, but also people of Indian descent and people of Arab descent. And then down the very bottom was the so-called inlander, or so-called natives. Now, being in the middle of this political, social, and economic hierarchy meant that my family enjoyed certain privileges, but also suffered racial violence at the hands of both the European colonial masters and also at the hands of the so-called inlander or natives. In fact, it was this form of racial violence which is why and how I came to be in so-called Australia in the first place, when racial violence exploded as part of a revolution in 1998. Now, Australia, like America, I would argue, is a colony. And unlike other countries, the colonizers never left. So one of the key questions that I'm constantly grappling with personally, but also professionally, is what is my role as a settler in a colony that continues to disproportionately kill First Nations people? And I will say that bluntly because that is a fact. Living in a colony disproportionately kills First Nations people. So through Creatives of Color, we've been asking ourselves, how can we be a part of channeling resources and helping to create spaces where First Nations mobs or First Nations people can self-determine what they need from and through their creative practice? So for example, at the end of this month, our First Nations co-facilitator, Jack Shepherd, who is from the Tagalaka clan, will be facilitating a Sovereign Elders dance workshop, which is open to First Nations elders Australia-wide. The second question I'd like to posit is, how can we be alive to moment-by-moment shifts in power? And I just want to thank my co-facilitator, Komang Rosie Kleins, for holding Creatives of Color accountable to this question. So Rosie and I were in the Lean Startup Accelerator program together last year. And initially, it made sense for it to be the two of us doing that work because we were actually conducting customer validation interviews with Indonesian international students. And both of us are of mixed Indonesian-Australian heritage. But then when we dropped out of that accelerator program and pivoted to become what is now the platform Creatives of Color, we found ourselves as two Asian people running a platform like Creatives of Color, two people that, again, I would argue with relative proximity to whiteness, who found ourselves with some gatekeeping power, some access to resources, networks, and opportunities. And so we kept this conversation alive between the two of us in terms of the power dynamics of running a platform like Creatives of Color. So what we've tried to do since then has been an attempt at redistributing that power, redistributing the resources, the networks, and opportunities by recruiting two new co-facilitators, one First Nations co-facilitator, Jack Shepherd, whom I mentioned before, and then one Black identifying, and in this case, South Sudanese co-facilitator, Bigwa Chol. Next up, I'd like us to think about what is our relationship to work. And I'm just gonna have a quick sip. So how I'm trying to answer this question is starting with, again, what have I inherited, or what have we inherited from those before us in terms of harmful relationships to work? And again, I'd like to begin by learning from what resides in my body. My great-great-grandfather on my mother's side was a Chinese coolie who worked for a white master, so a Chinese indentured laborer. And my great-great-grandfather died from opium. Now, some of you might know that opium was useful for the white masters because it overrode the laborers' need to eat, drink, sleep, and also deadened pain. It also kept them in debt so that they had to keep working for their white masters. Now, this addiction to opium literally led to thousands of people laboring themselves to death. And it was designed to be so. So what are some harmful relationships to work that I may have inherited from my ancestors? At Creatives of Color, we have been deliberately channeling resources to prioritize rest and reflection. In fact, one of our most popular offerings was actually the Rest and Reflect residencies, which was a series of micro grants that we paid, where we paid creatives of color to commit to resting and reflecting for a period of half a day a week for 4 weeks in a row. And we didn't ask for any outcomes. All that we asked for was brief reflections to the following questions. What did this residency make you think about? How did this residency make you feel? And what is your relationship to rest? All right, so before I reveal the final question, I would like to thank my colleagues in Aotearoa, which is the First Nations or Maori name for so-called New Zealand, for this following question. What is our 500-year vision? What values do we want to guide us to get us there? And how can we practice these values in how we treat our bodies moment by moment, day by day? And finally, I'd like to leave you with a final provocation, which is that in order to achieve justice and equity, we need to begin with our bodies. So if you'd like to be a part of discovering, experimenting, and practicing together, please reach out to us at Creatives of Color AU and creativesofcolor.com. And thank you so much, Tech Inclusion, for having me today. Thank you.